Welcome to the Surge On Demand webinar, Creating Meetings That Matter, Spiritual and Practical Ideas for Running Efficient, Effective, and Faith-Based Meetings. Some say that the mundane ritual of meetings is antithetical to living our faith. On the contrary, the time we spend planning and deciding the day-to-day and future events of our congregations is an opportunity to live our Unitarian Universalist principles and beliefs. Drawing on the wisdom in Eric Wickstrom's Serving with Grace, this session will offer both spiritual and practical ideas for running efficient, effective, and faith-based meetings. The philosopher James T. Kirk of the USS Enterprise said, "A meeting is an event where minutes are taken and hours are wasted. But friends, it doesn't have to be that way." Let's focus on the meeting as business practice in contrast to a meeting as spiritual practice. As business, we tend to focus on the what, the content. It refers to what is talked about at the meeting, the agenda topics, information, opinions, decisions, action plans, and the task of the meeting. As spiritual practice, the focus is on the how the meeting proceeds, how the group works together to accomplish the task, how the group makes decisions and builds consensus. As business, we begin with a review of the agenda. As spiritual practice, we begin with a ritual, usually the lighting of the chalice. As business, we assume that all belong. In our spiritual meetings, we assure that all belong. As business, we create results. As spiritual practice, we create a sense of community. As business, we pay attention to the product, the bottom line. As spiritual practice, we pay attention to the people, the top line. As business, we make contracts. As spiritual practice, we make promises, we make covenants. As business, we avoid conflict. As spiritual practice in our meetings, we embrace conflict. And finally, as business practice, we take up space. As spiritual practice, we are intentional about the space that we use. While it's important to attend to the business of the meeting, after all, you are investing your time in the possibility of creating something that will move your congregation forward. All business is couched in the context of those documents that define who you are as a congregation and what you believe in. So ever present in our meetings must be our principles, the congregational mission statement, behavioral covenants, and end statements if your congregation is under policy governance. All our work and our interactions with each other should take place with one or several of these guiding lights in mind. Peter Block, who wrote Community, The Structure of Belonging, says that we come together not just to conduct business, but for an exchange of value and to experience relatedness, gifts, learning, and generosity. When we come together in meetings, we create community. So why meet? Consider these questions. Would a meeting be worthwhile if we simply strengthened our relationship? Would a meeting be worthwhile if we learned something of value? Suppose in a meeting we simply stated our requests of each other and what we were willing to offer each other. Would that justify our time together? And what if we only discussed the gifts we wanted to bring to bear on the issues that brought us together? Would that be enough? Answering yes to these questions brings us closer to a faith-based meeting and the employment of spiritual practice in our gatherings. So let's talk more specifically now. All meetings have a beginning, and they should begin with opening words and a chalice lighting. And it's a really good idea to alternate the responsibility for this among members of the team. We all need to be reminded of why we have gathered, of the reason why this meeting needs to take place, and of the greater good that will be achieved through our coming together. And so there should be a reading of a covenant that we've developed, promises that we make to each other. If you don't have a covenant, then read your mission statement. If you don't have a mission statement, then read our principles. And thirdly, it's a good idea to do a check-in so that people have an opportunity to speak as soon as the meeting begins. But the check-in needs to be brief. All of us have been victimized by check-ins that seemingly go on for hours. The best way to define the check-in is as a statement of what you had to give up in order to be here. In other words, what is the cost of your attending this meeting? All things of value have a cost. The check-in is an opportunity to state what that cost is. Here's a sample meeting covenant that comes from my home congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Delaware County in Media, Pennsylvania. And at the beginning of our meetings, we read this aloud. As Unitarian Universalists, we can share the same faith despite differing views. We covenant to use reason and judgment and respect for each other, knowing we need consent and enthusiasm to reach our goals. When we act in a group, we will hear all of our voices, accept the reaction of others, trust those who lead us, commit to the decisions of the group, and commit resources to our goal. Again, Peter Block said, we have to realize that each time people enter a room, they walk in with ambivalence, wondering whether this is the right place to be. This is because they believe that someone else owns the room. Key to a successful spiritual meeting is ensuring that everyone who participates is responsible and accountable, and that's not always easy to achieve. Accountability, says Peter Block, is the willingness to acknowledge that we have participated in creating the conditions that we wish to see changed. Community will be created the moment we decide to act as creators of what it can become. So how do we create accountability among meeting participants? Wes Fessler said, good men and women are bound by conscience and liberated by accountability. So here are some ideas. First, ask for agenda items in advance. It's a great way to empower members of the group to be invested in the meeting and what will be discussed at the meeting. Prior to the meeting, send any and all written materials to all meeting participants that pertain to the business of the meeting. Why spend time having people read materials in the meeting and then have to respond and comment immediately? Thirdly, alternate roles. That is, opening words and chalice lighting, facilitation, timekeeping, process checking, food bringing. Food bringing? While this is risky for some, particularly the role of facilitation, it is a great way to empower those who otherwise would take a back seat. It also sends the message that we are all in this together and that we share the labor as well as the fruits of our labor. And start and end the meeting on time, even if you're the only one in the room. And make sure that you end it on time. That is the commitment that you make to others. The meeting is a journey, hopefully a spiritual journey. Along the way, here are some suggestions to facilitate both process and content. Set time limits for each item on the agenda. And when people submit time limits, ask them also to indicate how much time they think they will need to present and discuss the issue. Decide on and label each item as information, discussion, or decision. For example, let's say the agenda item is planning the fall in-gathering worship service. If I only want to let the group know the date of the service and the sermon theme that the minister has picked up, then I would label that item as I for information. But let's say that I want to present the in-gathering worship service date and sermon topic and allow some time for discussion of what that in-gathering could look like. Then that would get a DI for discussion. Or I may present the in-gathering worship service with the date and the sermon topic, allow some time for discussion, but say to the group that we can't leave today until we make a decision about what the service will look like. Well, that would get a DE for decision. It helps members of the group to know what the intended outcome of each agenda item is, and then that helps to guide the discussion. Record ideas and outcomes on flip chart paper. Now, you don't have to do this with everything that's discussed in the meeting, but if you're brainstorming or if you're putting up some options for a solution to a particular problem, it's a good idea to put it up so that people can read it. We learn three ways: visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically. Those of us who are auditory learners don't need flip charts to see what's being discussed, but most of us are visual learners, and we need to be able to see as well as hear the course of the conversation in order to stay in touch and stay on top of what's being discussed. Develop what I call an IBN list, important but not now. This is a list of items that are brought up but are not relevant to the discussion or are not on the agenda. Often we get sidetracked with issues that come up that were not scheduled to be discussed that evening. But we don't want to ignore them either. So an IBN list allows us to note those issues but not address them during the course of the current meeting. As the journey continues, be the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is the person who invites people into the discussion and gently limits the time of others. So, for example, Ethel, we haven't heard from you for a while. Please share your thoughts on this issue. Or Fred, you've made your point really well, and here's what I'm getting from what you're saying. Now let's offer some other people the opportunity to participate as well. Periodically take the pulse of the group. It's a good idea to stop sometimes and just have each member of the team share where they are in their thought process related to the issue that you're discussing. Assign a vibes watcher, someone to note, is everyone being heard? Are we giving everyone our full attention? Are people taking advantage of the time given to them? Is everyone participating? While all of us need to pay attention to these process items, the vibes watcher has the assignment of keeping these things in front of him or her so that they can give feedback to the group at the end of the meeting. And then wrapping up. It's important to summarize what the group accomplished. Members of the team need to know that the time that they spent was invested wisely. Summarizing what the group accomplished highlights for the group how they spent that time. Review the important but not now list and decide how to address the issues. Some can be tabled to the next meeting as you begin to form an agenda. Others might need to be addressed in between meetings. This is the time when you make those decisions. And then check out, again briefly. And this should not only focus on what was accomplished and who will take responsibility for the next steps, but also on the process. Did we live our covenant? Did we represent our congregation as faithfully and lovingly as we could? Did we adhere to our principles in our interactions with each other? Some brief thoughts about conflict. Avoid it at all costs. I'm just kidding. Look, conflict is inevitable whenever people come together to discuss matters that really mean something. Rather than avoiding conflict, you want to manage it, and you want to anticipate it. And here's some ways to do that. Create a covenant. Create ground rules, promises that the team will make to each other. And if one member violates the covenant, then you gently remind them of that and call them back into the promise that they had made. Take what Eric Wickstrom calls breath breaks. When things start to get heated, it's a good idea to stop and have the whole group take 3 or 4 deep breaths in order to move from an emotional state to a more reasoned and logical one. And embrace dissent as an essential part of being in community. Peter Block says, creating space for dissent is the way diversity gets valued in the world. Inviting dissent into the world is how we show respect for a wide range of beliefs. Rather than trying to defend ourselves against doubt and dissent, we need to listen. Listening and understanding at a deeper level than is being expressed is the action that creates or restores community. We practice our 5th principle in the decisions we make in our meetings. It's the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. So in doing so, we need to strive for consensus. And consensus is not unanimity. I define it as when the minority, having had ample opportunity to convince the majority of their point of view, agrees to abide by the decision of the majority. And if I, as a member of the team, know that I was fully heard, then I can support the decision that was made by the majority. And by the way, it's okay when asked by members of the congregation to say, that was not the decision that I would have made, but I was heard. I was heard fully. And as we agreed and as we covenanted with each other, I support the decision that was made. And then finally, I want to talk about space, the final frontier, focusing on the physical setting in which our meetings take place. Again, Peter Block. Community is built when we sit in circles, when there are windows and the walls have signs of life, when every voice can be equally heard and amplified, when we are all on one level and the chairs have wheels and swivels. The way we occupy the room can meet our intention to build relatedness, accountability, and commitment. And here are some of the ways in which Peter Block recommends that we create that community. Sit in chairs in a circle, ideally with no tables in the way. If you must have tables, make them round ones. Long rectangular tables are designed for negotiation, one side facing the other. You see only those on the other side and sit blind to those on your own side of the table. If you cannot make eye contact with half the people in the room, you are not creating a spiritual community. If you are able to meet without tables, put the chairs as close together as possible. This forces people to lean into one another. Meet in a room that has windows. A room with no windows carries the message that the larger world does not, for this moment, exist. It isolates us from the larger world and gives permission to be focused narrowly on the smaller world within the boundaries of our own interests. Leave the door to the meeting room open. Allow people to come in and out if they need to. And put life on the walls. William H. White said, "An empty wall is a testimony to the insignificance of the human spirit." Filling the meeting room walls with art and artifacts that represent the youth and adults of your congregation affirms the significance of the human spirit and reminds you why you gather to meet in the first place. Let me end with a quote by our own Henry David Thoreau. "If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them." I hope that you have enjoyed this on-demand webinar and that it gives you some concrete ideas that you can employ in your congregation. You can find additional resources, including references to the Wickstrom and Block books cited in this webinar, at our website www.cerg.org.